You're listening to the Play Therapy Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks, your source for centered and focused play therapy coaching.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brenna Hicks, the Kid Counselor. This is the Play Therapy Podcast, where you get a masterclass in child-centered play therapy and practical support and application for your work with children and their families. In today's episode, it is a special episode. I'm really excited about this. You know that I don't often have guests on the podcast, but today I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby. We have collaborated in the past. I've actually been a part of her podcasts, and I'm so thrilled to be able to share some time with her today. We're going to dive into all things related to working with parents today. So, Lisa, thank you so much for being here. I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
I could not be more thrilled, Brenna. Thank you again so much for the invitation. So I'm Lisa Marie Bobby, and yes, my background, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm also a licensed psychologist, and I'm a board certified coach. And I specialize in growth, love, happiness, and success. But as a marriage and family therapist, this has often involved working with couples and parents around one of their most important goals, which is how to create a happy, loving family. A subspecialty of mine is actually divorce and breakup recovery. And so frequently for couples whose relationships haven't been able to be repaired, I'm frequently working with them around how to be the best parents they can be during these types of family transitions.
Sure. And that's why you're here. I'm so excited about this. So my audience is constantly processing and dialoguing and questioning best practice for working with parents in situations like these, because what often happens is parents know that there's an impending separation, an impending divorce, and they seek therapy to, quote, help with what's to come. Or they have recently separated or recently divorced and the kids are reeling. And then we're kind of thrust in the midst of the chaos as the therapist trying to navigate this. Or we have come in after the fact and it's just highly contentious, highly conflictual. And there's just, they can't even be in the same room with each other. They can't speak except through an app. And there's just really deep disdain and brokenness in that kind of family dynamic. So we often find ourselves in the midst of all of those scenarios. And so I'm really looking forward to being able to kind of get your thoughts and pick your brain a little bit, as this is your area of expertise for sure. So let's start with, I think, what all of us need and want to know, and then we'll kind of dive a little bit deeper as we get into this a little bit more. But one of the questions that we are constantly trying to answer is, what insight do we not know that we need to know? In other words, we are always in advocacy for the child. Our therapeutic alliance is only with the child. Yes, of course, we provide support and encouragement and updates and all of the things like that to parents, but our clinical interaction and our client relationship is with the child, yet we can't do our job without also recognizing that parents are our customers. And we talk a lot about that, the client versus the customer in our specific field. So when we think about this, I'm always going, I can advocate for the child and I understand that piece, but we often don't understand what parents really need and want from us, especially when they're in the midst of their own grief and brokenness and sadness and anger and all of those things. So I think, if you wouldn't mind, if you could dive in with us a little bit here. What are the things that we don't know that we need to know, and what insight are we missing when we are thrust into the midst of a scenario like this? What do parents need us to know?
Okay, fantastic question, multidimensional answer.
Yes.
But first of all, I think what a beautiful thing that parents love their children so deeply that they are bringing them to you. And in that act, really taking action to care for their children, and to consider that perhaps that is partially motivated by the fact that when relationships, not just relationships, families, hopes, dreams, lives are coming apart, parents are not okay. And perhaps even knowing that they can't be, in some ways, the primary support person for their children during a time when they are not functioning that well or feeling that good, to bring them to you and essentially entrust them into your care is such a beautiful act of love. And I think that that should be acknowledged, because I think a parent's greatest fear when they're going through a divorce is that this will irreparably harm their children. And
Yes.
so anything that we as therapists can do to help the parents of our clients be more centered in their parenting responsibility, and to the degree that you can in the type of role that you're talking about. I mean, you are the therapist of the child, be directing the parent to high quality, evidence-based resources that will allow them to do the work that they need to do during this time so that they can be the parents that they want to be and not just outsource all of that to you.
Yes. And thanks for bringing that up, because that's one of the main points of our focus of each and every parent consultation.
Yeah.
It's to normalize, reassure, validate all of those things that you mentioned, but then also equip parents with knowledge and awareness and understanding, almost psychoeducation to a degree, where it's something that they feel that they not only have responsibility and ownership of, which is very powerful, but also that they feel that they can do right by their children.
Exactly.
And I think that what you said is what I've heard echoed over and over and over again. I don't want this to screw up my kids.
Right.
I don't want this to damage my kids. I went through a divorce and it wrecked me. I don't want this to be the case for my children. So
Right.
there's the fear coupled with the hope. And I think that that's a very vulnerable place to be. But I think that it's our job to make sure that we are equipping them as much as they are willing or able to receive it. Because
Yeah.
let's face it, sometimes parents are in the midst of their own junk and they can't work on their kids. They have to work on themselves first, right? You give out of the overflow. So I think sometimes it doesn't land because they can't handle it. But for those that really desperately are seeking to support and help and be involved in the journey, that is one of our greatest objectives when we have those parent meetings.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so what are your thoughts on practical strategies? And I don't know, how many this will be, but I'd love to hear some practical strategies for what we can do in really kind of tangible ways to support parents from afar, because obviously our clinical work is with the child, but parents still need to be supported and encouraged through this process as well. How could we do that? What are some practical strategies there?
Yeah. Well, it's actually, I think, fairly simple in some ways. And backing up just a tiny bit, we have a problem, I think, culturally and in our field, in that there are very specific human life experiences that therapists do not get any specialized training, education, or guidance around how to help people through. And going through a bad breakup or divorce is actually one of those things. So, because of this, there is very little information available to the general public or therapists around this unique transitional phase, what happens to people internally, the stages and the process of not air quote getting over it, but truly creating internal closure, working through big emotions associated with it, getting clarity about values, being able to manage the big emotions. All of this is involved in unwinding a very powerful attachment bond to another human. I mean, like, there's a lot here. And then this work culminates in values-based clarity about who you are, what you want to do with your life, really an active process of rebuilding a next chapter. Therapists are not taught how to do this.
Right.
So when somebody is going through this, it feels like an explosion has gone off in their lives. They are often dealing, particularly early stages of this, a very intense internal experience that is all consuming. Anger, grief, rage, obsessive thoughts about an ex. Like people do all kinds of things in this space that they don't know how to manage. And so I think the very first thing that we can do as therapists in the role that you described is first to say to a parent, you are going through something that requires a very specialized knowledge and skill set to help you move through productively that most therapists don't have. Unfortunately, if somebody in that space goes to a standard issue therapist, they will either attempt to diagnose and treat a mental health condition because that is what we do. So they're looking for, okay, do you have anxious attachment? Where's the childhood trauma? Like, what is wrong with you that you're going through this? Not really understanding that this is a human experience. Or at best, a therapist may be like, okay, looks like we need to process some grief, not really realizing that there is a whole constellation of other things that happen in terms of that internal healing experience, but also a very specialized thing that happens around going through a divorce with children in co-parenting, custody structures, how to manage that whole experience. If you start dating again, like there's a lot there. So the things that therapists can do is advise parents to understand that they need specialized support for this and then help them get connected, perhaps even doing some research in support of helping the parents get connected with the right kind of therapist who specializes in divorce and breakup recovery coaching to facilitate this process. And there aren't a ton of therapists out here who do it, but the ones who have that training do it very well. And it is transformational. And it's the kind of approach that helps parents contain their stuff, do fantastic work, but without it negatively impacting the child. Because if parents don't do this, their stuff will get in the way of their kids in an emotional sense, in the way that they're relating to their kids, but also will make it very hard for them to do the things needed for their kids to be okay in the aftermath of this, because the way that parents handle a divorce has a big impact and outcomes for the children.
Yes, and we know that.
Yeah.
And it's so fascinating that you said there's so few trainings and coachings and awareness around this because look at the statistics. I mean, I think recently I read, almost 70% of marriages end in divorce right now. So if we're looking at that, we're looking at 7 out of 10 people are going to go through this at some point. And as therapists, clinically in the field, we're not really equipped to deal with this. And then obviously, parents are not equipped to deal with this. Every parent that gets married thinks that it's forever, or they hope that it is at the very least. And so, then you're thrust into this craziness where, you mentioned the attachment and unwinding a connection. And think about how much more complicated it becomes when you are inextricably tied to that person forever through your children. Because you could part ways with someone and say, I will never see you or talk to you again. And there's finality to that. Yet every transition, every back and forth exchange, every school play, every moment in the future, holidays, whatever, there's always consideration of this person that used to be a part of our lives and is no longer a part of our lives.
Yeah.
And that just brings with it so much. And yes, of course, we can think about stages of grief, but I think it's important to also acknowledge what you shared, which is there's so much more than that. And there's so much extra that is piled on top. And then fear of making sure that kids are okay in the midst of it. So extra layer of pressure and concern. Gosh, it's so much. And one of the things that we talk about a lot from a child-centered perspective is that parents often need to do their own work. And so every time we meet with a parent, if stuff is coming up and it's evident to us clinically, gosh, this person is so anxious. This person has so much childhood stuff. This person is so angry. This person has no frustration tolerance, whatever it is, we always try to encourage that they would seek help and work on that, because we talk a lot about children. I think we actually talked about this on your podcast. Children can only come so far.
Right.
So parents have to do their part. And there's some onus for the parent to say, I need to sort through my own stuff. And I think being able to refer to very specific people with intention that these are equipped therapists that can navigate this with you, that's a lifeline to a parent in this scenario. That's very powerful.
Yeah. Thank you. That's the intention, because really they don't know what to do.
Yes.
So
And I love the role. I mean, I guess it's bittersweet, but I love the role in which we find ourselves as CCPTs because people look to us for things that are far outside of our scope. So it's like, what preschool should we send our child to? What do you think about if I switched my kid to homeschool? What do you think about if he starts soccer? And we're put in this position where often I think we feel that it's a little bit out of our wheelhouse, yet at the same time, the implication is that they trust us and they need help and they're relying on us to provide them with some thought or some perspective or some objectivity. And I think this is one of those scenarios. If they're seeking therapy, they trust us enough with their kids. They would trust recommendations. But when we fall short, whether it's because of ignorance or lack of awareness or whatever, when we say, gosh, I really don't know who you should go talk to, that's a missed opportunity. And so I think making sure we have resources at the ready.
Right.
These are the people that I trust. These are the people that I would recommend. These are the things that I think would be helpful for you. Obviously, it's ultimately up to the parent, but we have to be equipped with helpful information because they are seeking our thoughts and they do want help from us and they trust us. That's a very powerful opportunity. And I think that, we should honor the fact that people are looking for help.
Absolutely. And to have that, and we've probably talked about this previously when you were so kind to visit on my show, but that I believe with all my heart that a very important professional obligation to be an ethical therapist is to have a network of other professionals around you that you know and trust and who do different things than you do for the purpose of being able to provide really high quality referrals that are specific and to do your research in advance, particularly if this is coming up over and over again. You probably need a few. I would look for a licensed marriage and family therapist. So someone who has quite specialized education, training, a different developmental path as a counselor that focuses on family systems and relational impacts and outcomes, who is going to understand more about this. And then on top of that, who is talking about specialized education and training in breakup recovery or divorce coaching. Certainly at my practice, Growing Self, we do a ton of that. But that's what I would look for, and go out there and make friends with that person. Take that therapist out to coffee because they need you too, right? They're not going to do what you guys do.
Yes. And that to me is the beauty of the network within our field, right? Because all of the adult therapists that do not want to work with kids, they love having us as referral partners. And for all of us that do not want to work with high conflict divorce, we need referral partners to which we can refer. And there's so much simple beauty in that, because I can't do what you can and vice versa. So we'll work together to serve this family.
Precisely.
Yes.
Yeah. And if I may, just one other tip for your therapists here listening. If I were in that position and needing to kind of break through to a parent who I saw was really struggling in the aftermath of a divorce and their own struggles and being kind of chaotic, not having good processes in place yet, I see it directly impacting the child. I personally would not shy away from having a very vulnerable and authentic conversation that centers the love they have for their children, I know that your number one fear is that this is going to impact the kid. And I need you to know that the way for your kid to be okay is for you to be okay. And I don't perceive you that way right now. This is a lot. I think you need support and guidance through this transition. Here is a business card. Call this person.
Yes.
Let me know how it goes next time. Like, do not sort of hint. And also don't say just therapy. I think you need to talk to somebody, because it's very easy for people to get connected to the wrong kinds of therapists in this moment. And that is going to waste their time and their opportunity. It's not going to make it better.
Yes. And oh my gosh, I'm so glad you brought that up, because
Um,
as we've joked, we're so aligned. So
I
one of
know.
the things that we talk about all the time, and one of the things that comes up over and over again, and I'm on repeat ad nauseum with this, is when we sit down and have a parent consultation,
Yeah.
our number one priority is to say what needs to be said, if it's to advocate on behalf of the child. If
Mhm.
that means that it's a tense conversation, if that means it's an emotional conversation, if that means it's something that the parent does not want to hear, but they need to hear it, if it needs to be a little bit confrontational, if it needs to be a little bit pushy, direct is always what is needed in those moments, because a parent is never going to be angry at you. They may react, but a parent is never going to be truly angry at you for caring about the well-being of their kid. And so I
Totally.
always advocate to all of my therapists, look, sometimes this forces you to have difficult, uncomfortable conversations, but you do it with love, you do it with grace, you do it with intention, and you come at it in the very same vein that you just said
Mhm.
is, I'm telling you this. I know this is hard to hear, and I know you probably don't want me to say this, but I need to say it because I care about your child. And the way that I care about your child is to let you know what I see is going on here right now.
Yeah.
And that is always well received, even if it's bristly a little bit at the beginning. There's always a circling back of going, but I know your intention. And I know
Mhm.
you wouldn't say it if it wasn't necessary. And
Yeah.
I know that you deeply care about my child, and that's why you had the courage to bring it up. And now we're back to, okay, so I need to do some work. And that's what we need parents to see in the first place. So yes,
Mhm.
100% for all of you CCPTs out there, you know how much we talk about this. You have those difficult conversations because they're necessary. And there's power in the confidence that we can bring to those interactions.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take a little bit of a turn here.
Okay.
What we often find is when parents are in the midst of all the things that we've been discussing, they really tend to react in really self-defeating ways or very difficult ways, or it somehow comes back as an attack on us. And I
Mm.
know it's not actually directed at us, but it comes across as angry or blaming or aggressive or resistant or defensive or whatever, fill in the blank. So we're doing our best. We are advocating on behalf of the child. We're doing all of this work on behalf of their children and their family. And the parent can, because of their circumstances, just make things really difficult for us to do our jobs. And so I'd like you to share a little bit of insight. What are your thoughts on how do we get them to engage? How do we get them to participate? How do we get them to lower the defenses a little bit and really see it for what it is, which is help and support for their children?
This is such a tough one, Brenna, because one of the things that is going on with people, particularly through, and are we talking still about like a divorce type transition in
Yes.
particular?
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
So, one of the things that I think is not commonly known, even by therapists, is that we are hardwired as humans to bond very deeply to other people, and that this is not just a emotional or psychological bonding. This is happening on biological levels. We are actually designed, our endocrine systems, things that are happening in our brains. I mean, like mammalian brain stuff is going on. And when these attachment bonds are broken, people are having big physiological survival drive type reactions that they themselves don't fully understand, but it impacts so many things, starting on a physiological basis. So their brains are working differently. They are experiencing, in a very real way, an existential traumatic threat. They are incredibly escalated. They are also oftentimes quite upset with themselves because their logical brain can say, he was a sociopath. He took out $80,000 worth of credit card debt in your name. There's no basis for this relationship to continue. But that, like, cognitive understanding of the relationship has no bearing on this attachment level bond. So I think that without really understanding what's happening, it's very easy to interpret somebody's behavior or reactivity or hostility at a surface level. I think then that it's very important for a clinician to be able to understand this and again communicate. We're both here because you want positive outcomes for your kid. You have hired me to help take care of your child's well-being. And I get them 1 hour, 1 day a week. So I need you to be a partner in this with me so that you can extend what's happening here in our sessions into your day-to-day life in your home. I am experiencing you right now as someone who may not be able or willing to do that, but is that true? And open the door. Because they might get mad at you and want to fight with you about it, but likely they'll be like, no, I want to participate in this. My kid is number one most important. And then you have the opportunity. And, it's a little bit of a mini session, but to crack into, tell me what your goals are for this. If you can get them to start talking about that, then you can get their buy-in in order to do what they need to do on their side to make that happen, which is doing their own work. And there's 2 levels of this, Brenna. They need to do their own work longer term to walk through all of the stages of this process, from that early stage withdrawal, relationship clarity, grieving, dark emotions, rebuilding their lives, so many things. But that's happening on their internal level. None of that should have anything to do with what they are doing as parents to their children. On that level, they need to be fully invested in an acceptance and commitment type model. I'm not okay. I'm dealing with all kinds of internal turmoil, and yet I am committed to behaving in this way for the benefit of my children. And my other stuff, I am going to take that somewhere else because it doesn't matter what I'm feeling. I need to be the parent that they need me to be. And that is a separation that happens with parents who are handling this in a healthy way. But when somebody's like in that washing machine, especially at the very beginning, they have no awareness around any of that. And so even just that little bit of psychoeducation can be helpful. But if you have a parent who is genuinely combative and who is not able to engage in those conversations, I think it's also ethical to say, my ability to help your child will be limited.
Yes.
I mean, if that's okay.
Oh, it absolutely is okay with me.
Yeah.
One of my favorite phrases is clear is kind.
Yeah.
And I think that in that scenario, clarity is necessary. And I think that's actually kindness to that parent, even in the midst of whatever they're dealing with. I'm not going to be able to help your child as much as I would like to in the current circumstances. I think that that clarity is required. And so 2 thoughts popped into my head when you were just sharing that answer. So the first is, we operate in CCPT predicated on the concept of unconditional acceptance. And I think what you just shared is, first of all, we need some awareness and insight, but above all, just as much as we extend unconditional acceptance to children in our playrooms, at their best, at their worst, in the midst of all of their junk, all of their dysfunction, all of their maladaptive coping, whatever, it's unconditionally accepted.
Mm.
I think we have to learn how to carry that over into unconditionally accepting wherever parents are.
Yeah.
I think that reframes everything. So I
Mhm.
think that's really powerful. And then the second piece, as you were talking, I was thinking about is we really truly are always thinking about end goal. And when you said to say to a parent, what are your goals? We return responsibility to children so that they feel completely in control over outcomes. And I think often the rub for parents, especially in a situation like we're discussing, is they feel that something's being pushed on them or expected of them or asked of them, or there's some kind of requirement. And really what it is, we are always talking about hope and transformation from a CCPT perspective. And if we can say, I'm wondering what kind of transformation you're looking for. I'm wondering what you're hopeful for when this process is over. Now, all of a sudden, they have responsibility over it, which is what we believe about what children gain in the playroom. So
Yeah.
there's so much overlap from what we already do and how we already think and believe and operate in the playroom.
Mhm.
And sometimes I think that gets lost in working with adults because we expect adults to be more cognitive and more rational and have abstract reasoning. But in these states, you're talking about it, there's emotional upheaval. And we know, I mean, across the board, all age ranges, we know emotions override cognitions. So when you are at that emotional of a place,
Mhm.
you're not going to be able to do and say the things that you normally would want to say and do. And that's exactly what we see with children. So this was actually really insightful for me as
Mm.
well as my audience, because
I'm
I
glad.
think we see it as adults should know better and they should know that they need to buy in and they should know. And there's all of this
Mm.
kind of pressure of parents, just do your part, right? That's what we long for. Parents, just do your part. But I think in a lot of these scenarios, it's recognizing where they are, unconditionally accepting that,
Mhm.
and then being able to give them some ownership and responsibility through the
Mhm.
process. That's very closely aligned with exactly what
Yeah.
happens with our children.
Yep. That makes
Wow, that was
perfect
that was
sense.
really that was really
Well,
helpful.
and again, I know that in your role, your client is the child. And so you need to be careful about holding those boundaries and not overstepping into a dual relationship with the customer in some ways, right? And so I'm
Right.
very sensitive to that as a family therapist. I'm also a clinical supervisor, and we need to be clear. And again, in service of the child's well-being, if you're clear that the system around that child also needs to be functioning in a certain way, to have just a bit of influence in the way that system develops for the better. A simple intervention that might be appropriate, and you would be the ultimate authority on this model and how it works, but could also simply to be or say, what kind of parent would you like to be to your child during this transition? Or what kind of experiences would you like your child to have with you during this transition? You can phrase it many different ways. What do you think your kid needs from you? But just to get them to mobilize this other part of their brain that can act the way that they need to act, no matter how they're feeling. They need to have that separation, though. And that could be one technique that may be appropriate just to help
Wow,
them like
really, really helpful. Yes. And interesting that you bring that up,
Mhm.
because one of the concepts or
Yeah.
tenets of CCPT is the idea that we are constantly evolving.
Mhm.
Roger said it's a process of becoming. And we talk all the time. One of my favorite phrases when I coach parents and when I talk to therapists about interacting with parents, one of my favorite phrases is when your children are 25
Mm.
and someone asks them, "Hey, what was your mom like when you were a kid? What do you remember
Ooh.
about your dad when you were young? What stands out to you about one of your parents? What do you want them to say as a 25-year-old adult? That should influence every moment that you are with them right now. And we talk about that question a lot, and it's so closely aligned with what you just said. How do
Perfect.
your kids need you to show up right now?
Mhm.
What kind of interactions do you want your children to have with you during this next year? Now, all of a sudden, it's practical, it's tangible, because we all, quote, want to be good parents. And that's relative, I recognize. But I mean, we all have this ideal version of ourselves, right? In all of our roles. But in our parenting role, like, I want to be fill in the blank, right? But often that seems way too vague and way too difficult to implement, especially in crisis. But now all of a sudden we're kind of taking the vague and the broad and we're funneling it down saying, what do my kids need from me right now? What will influence this moment? Well, what my kid's going to say about me when they're 25. I want to make sure that what I'm about to say and do in this moment is going to align with what I want their answer to be. Very powerful.
Absolutely.
And we use that phrase a lot.
That's so good. Well, and can we all just like pause too to acknowledge how hard it really is to do that? I mean, Brenna, I know you're a mom. I am. I'm sure many of your listeners are. And I think that one of the most challenging in some ways, but also fundamentally true things about being a parent is that it matters. You matter a lot less in that relationship, to be completely honest. If your kid is sick in the middle of the night, you need to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and take care of them, no matter if you're tired or not. If they are hungry and you don't feel like making dinner, you actually have to do it anyway. Like there are so many small instances in which parents need to set their own feelings and preferences aside, even just for a little bit, in order to prioritize the well-being of their kids. And I think that we do this so instinctively so many times. It's a natural thing for us, but sometimes we don't even consciously realize that we're doing it. And so just then to highlight a parent's natural instinct to do those things and say, this is another area in which you're going to have to do that, I think can be very not just validating, but also affirming and create for them an identity of what really being a good parent means, a self-concept that says, I will put my kids first, especially during this kind of crisis situation. And particularly if you can tie that to certain behaviors, it can be very powerful and they feel good about it. I'm
Yes.
the kind of person that does not actually unload on my kids about how much I hate their father. I go tell somebody else about that, or I journal
I have a
quietly
different
in the
venting
other
partner.
room.
Yes.
So yeah. Okay.
But that, I mean, look, let's tie it back to
Yeah.
CCPT. That's ideal versus actual self. My actual self might be a wreck right now. My
Yes.
actual self might be emotionally upheaved. My actual self might be exhausted and overwhelmed and just, I have no bandwidth left. But
Right.
my ideal self as a parent is whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what CCPT does for kids. That's what CCPT does in principle for every view of self-actualizing. It's you can become a better version of yourself and become more aligned to your ideal. And I think those are very practical ways for parents to see the path to get there. And often that's, we talk a lot about we're helping parents understand hope and transformation. That's the journey. Think about how that can convey to their own journeys. I am hopeful that I'm going to be okay. I'm hopeful that I can manage this. I'm hopeful that I'm going to do the work I need to do and it's going to make me feel better. I know that eventually things are going to get better. There's the transformation part. There's so much overlap in this. And I'm going to be really frank. I mean, my listeners know how brutally honest I am. But just talking to you, Lisa, I am making connections that I've never made before just from this
Really?
dialogue. And so I'm hopeful that that's really going to convey to all the rest of the CCPTs because
Yeah.
I think sometimes we don't work with adults, right? I mean, child
Right.
center play therapists, our clients are children and usually 14 and under, which means we don't even have the rational piece of kids. We have the very irrational piece of kids. And I think we have maybe missed the connections that every time a parent sits in front of us, there's overlap in everything that we believe, but we kind of get out of, I'm not doing child-centered play therapy mode right now. So therefore, I'm going to have a rational conversation with an adult. And I don't know that that works in scenarios like this. And that
Yeah.
has just given me a lot of insight about how we can merge what we do all day, every day with kids and apply it to adults and
Yeah.
parents in these situations.
Well, that's great.
Yeah,
So
I'm actually really excited.
oh no, but so the new insight. Well, and so I think this is because I think too, and I'm sure that your listeners can relate that there are, I think in different types of training experiences for therapists, it creates different worldviews. And I think that, and I know this from my own training as a psychologist, that we can be focused on that individual experience and like in the case of a child, really. But I think maybe potentially one of the things that is impacting this is my primary orientation, honestly, is as a marriage and family therapist, which is, looking at the system in which people exist as impacting them. And so in those conversations, like with a parent, you are tweaking the system in which the child exists. And so by having some of these impactful conversations with parents, you are actually creating different outcomes for the child, because if a parent shows up differently, it changes the system. So you are still acting very much in the service of your client when you do that. But I'm so glad. So what changed for you? I mean, like, I'm so curious.
I'm just realizing that
Mm.
I have not historically seen the crossover
Yeah.
of the vulnerability required, the unconditional acceptance that's required, the
Oh, I see.
recognition that emotions override the cognitions, like all the stuff that we believe is true about children. I think once we cross that 14 or so year old threshold in our brains, it's like, well, now you're able to do all those things.
I see. So it's the shift is like that you're really able to almost apply that same theory of change to a parent's experience and that perhaps understanding them.
Right. And that's exactly what it
Yeah.
is. It's just
Yeah.
insight and perspective, which that was exactly the whole purpose of this whole episode. I said, I want my listeners to gain insight and perspective on what we need to do to better serve parents in situations like this. And I absolutely feel that I've gained insight and perspective.
Oh,
So I'm
good.
hopeful that the audience has too. All right. So as we wrap up, I'd like to pick your brain for one final thing.
Yeah.
I mean, gosh, you've shared a wealth of helpful
Oh.
information, but what is one main takeaway that we as CCPTs need to either understand or know or be aware of? Like, what's the main thing that is going to really help us to serve families as a whole, but specifically parents when we're aligned, clinically and therapeutically with the child? What do we need to do or know so that this can be the best that it can be?
Yeah. I think my one big takeaway or final thought is that the well-being of children is just profoundly dependent on the well-being of the adults that care for them day to day. And if parents are unwell, they are not able to behave in the ways that they need to in order to not just meet the needs of their children, but the mental, emotional, psychological needs, particularly during very stressful periods of transition. Kids are grieving. They're going through a lot. They really need a lot of extra support and understanding. And especially if a parent is, say, eager to start a new relationship or introducing a new stepdad, like parents and kids can be in very different places mentally and emotionally. And the more that an adult can do to bring themselves into a good place where they are feeling okay, thinking clearly, managing themselves well, charting a course for the future, when they can manage themselves, it will lead to much more positive outcomes for children in every way. So we can't take the functioning of parents out of that equation. That is my perspective. But again, I know I'm coming at this from a different, not from a CCPT lens.
No, but
Yeah.
it's so on target and it's so helpful because we think about the influence that parents have. We know, even in
Totally.
CCPT research, we know
Mhm.
that our outcomes are greater when parents are on board and supportive
Yeah,
and bought in and all those things. So the influence the parent has cannot be downplayed at all. We know
absolutely not.
that. And then we also know that kids are very protective of the people that they love. So if a child perceives that a parent is unwell, if a child perceives that a parent is volatile or emotional or reactive, or they can't handle my grief because they're dealing with their own stuff, they can't handle my anger because it's going to make them angry,
Exactly.
they will absolutely shut down. And then they have to try to hold all that themselves. So I 100% agree with you.
Yeah.
You cannot isolate the child's well-being from the parent's well-being because
Mhm.
kids are going to say, you can't handle my junk, so I have to stuff it. And that's so unhealthy for a child. It's so unhealthy for the parent, and it's so unhealthy for the relationship.
Could not
So,
agree more.
yeah, really
Yeah.
helpful takeaway. Well, Lisa, thank
So,
you so much. It
yeah,
was so wonderful to have you on
thank
here.
you.
And if any of my therapists would like to speak with you further or pick your brain a little bit more or find out what you're about, where should they go to reach
Oh,
out to you?
thank you. And yeah, and I have free resources for your community as well. And so, one free resource to consider if you have a parent who is going through this and they need to work on stuff, tons of free resources. You can send them to my website, growingself.com. I have a whole section around divorce and breakup recovery with a ton of free resources. So, I am the host of the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast, and we're frequently talking about these things on that show. They can go to the blog and podcast section. I have a whole section with podcast playlists on the subject, articles written by myself, other people on the team. I have a book. Exaholics Breaking Your Addiction to an Ex Love, that can help them begin to develop clarity around what their path forward needs to look like. I have different assessments, like how over your relationship are you, that can help them get visibility in what they need to do. So that could be a starting point to send your clients, just to start educating themselves on, what do I need to do in order to be okay? So there's that. And then additionally, and Brenna, I don't know if you've tackled this before, but in my experience, one of the most stressful things that can come up for therapists related to kids and parents in a divorce context is not actually related to the therapy itself. And it's typically not if, but when you get subpoenaed, dragged in to either testify around, professional recommendations related to custody, or get hauled into a child and family investigation type scenario. And so on my other podcast that I do for clinicians, Love, Happiness, and Success for Therapists, I have a couple of resources for that. I had the great privilege of speaking with a wonderful family law attorney who operates as a CFI to talk about like do's and don'ts for us in that process. And I think, I don't know if it's out yet. It's coming out soon if it isn't. Spoke with another family law attorney about what to do when you are subpoenaed to come and testify, and how to handle that well. Because that can be a weird intersection for us
Sure.
professionally when we're interfacing with legal systems. And I'm sure that must come up for your clinicians.
Yeah, we talk about it a lot,
Yeah.
actually. I have a resource section in the
Oh,
collective
good.
about it, and I've put out all kinds of information
good.
about that. It's one of our greatest fears, and
It
it's one of our
is.
greatest opportunities.
It
So
is.
it is a very interesting intersection, 100%. So, all right, y'all. So let me summarize all that. So you know how much we talk about we need to provide resources to parents. That's one of our main objectives of our parent consults, is to provide them with helpful tools, strategies, tips, whatever they need that will help us do the work that we need to do, but also help them to be more effective parents. So this will all be in the show notes for you. We'll give you access to all of the stuff that Lisa has graciously shared. This is going to be huge because often when we are in those PCs and things are feeling tense and difficult, and we know there's all kinds of stuff going on in the family's world, we often don't really know what to say or do. And now we will have some practical, tangible things. Hey, I really think that you need to go listen to some episodes in this podcast. I really think you need to go read or take this quiz or whatever. Now, all of a sudden, there's tangible things that we can recommend in addition to some of the other things that we would naturally say. So that's so exciting. I'm really looking forward to being able to, all my people to have access to that. So
Wonderful.
well, Lisa, thank you so much for being here. This has been such a pleasure. And I know that my people will likely be reaching out and connecting with you. And I think that the more networked we can be to serve our clients in the most effective ways, that's one of the things that we have to consider on a daily basis. What do I need to know to better support and serve families? And this is a huge need for us. And you've just provided us with so much. I'm really grateful.
Well, I'm grateful for you too. And I have so much respect and admiration for what you and your community are doing. And right back at you in terms of referrals and recommendations, because this is not what I do. It's not what a lot of therapists do. And the world needs you. You guys are amazing.
Oh, well, the world needs y'all too. So, all right, Lisa, thank you so much. All right, y'all, you know how much I love you. We'll talk again soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Play Therapy Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks. For more episodes and resources, please go to www.playtherapypodcast.com.